When Saul and his 3 sons died in battle against the Philistines, it seems to have opened the way for David to become king of Israel. However, 2 important men of Saul's retinue survived the battle. Saul's son Esh-baal, or also known as Ishbosheth, and Saul's cousin and general Abner. In fact, Ishbosheth may not have even been involved in the battle at all. He was not listed as among the sons of Saul who went into battle with him. After Saul's death, Abner convinces the people of Israel to proclaim Ishbosheth as king. Now this opens the way for a civil war in Israel, and once more, David is put in the position of opposing a king of Israel. Now how will David prevail and ascend to his God-appointed position of king, not only of just Judah, but over all of Israel? I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is the Promise of Rest. After receiving news of Saul's death, David did not immediately claim or seize the throne of Israel. Instead, he showed his humility and submission to God by asking God what actions he should take. David began by simply asking God if he should travel to one of the major cities of Judah. Now remember, at this time, David is living in Ziklag, a city within the territory claimed by the Philistines. 2 Samuel 2, 1-3. It happened after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah?" And the Lord said to him, "Go up." David said, "Where shall I go up?" And he said, "To Hebron." So David went up there, and his 2 wives also, Ahinoam the Jezreelite, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. And David brought up his men who were with him, every man with his household. So they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. God told David to go to Hebron, which was a major city in Judah. Now this was the city that was given to Caleb at the allotment of the land of Israel. In addition, Hebron was the burial place of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The sages writing in the Zohar state that David had to reside in Hebron before he could become king of Israel. David could not become king until he came to Hebron and united himself spiritually with the patriarchs who are buried there in the cave of Machpelah. So David traveled to Hebron with his wives and his men. They settled in the cities around Hebron to wait for events in the rest of Israel. When Samuel had anointed Saul as king, Samuel called for a gathering of Israel and showed by lot that God had selected Saul as king. Then after Saul won his first battle, the people united to proclaim Saul as king. However, in the situation David was in, Samuel had died, and there was no one to call Israel together to select David as king. By this time, it was common knowledge that God had chosen David to be king after Saul. David's progress toward kingship of Israel started off well, with the leaders of Judah accepting him as king. 2 Samuel 2, 4-5. Then the men of Judah came, and they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, "The men of Jabesh-Gilead were the ones who buried Saul." So David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh-Gilead and said to them, "You are blessed of the Lord, for you have shown this kindness to your Lord, to Saul, and have buried him." David sent word to the men of Jabesh-Gilead, commending them for honoring Saul and Jonathan's bodies. He let them know that the process of him becoming king over Israel had begun with Judah's proclamation of him as king. 2 Samuel 2, verse 7. "Now, therefore, let your hands be strengthened, and be valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them." The men of Jabesh-Gilead were staunch supporters of Saul. Saul had come to their aid when they were under siege by the Ammonites. Now further, Saul and the other members of the tribe of Benjamin were descendants from the women of Jabesh-Gilead, which further strengthened their ties between Saul and Jabesh-Gilead. Now they were inclined to support Saul's remaining son, Ishbosheth, as king after Saul. Saul's general and kinsman Abner could have directed that support to David. However, he instead proclaimed Ishbosheth as king over Israel. 2 Samuel 2, 8 through 11. But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. And he made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, and over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. Only the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. So while David is waiting to be proclaimed king of Israel, Abner took Ishbosheth to Mahanaim in Gilead, which was near Jabesh-Gilead, the stronghold of support for Saul, and proclaimed Ishbosheth to be the king of Israel. Ishbosheth's support, spearheaded by Abner, spread from Gilead and eventually included all Israel except for Judah. So instead of David becoming the undisputed king over Israel, Israel was divided, with Judah supporting David and the rest of Israel supporting Ishbosheth. However, Ishbosheth would only rule over Israel for 2 years. Notice that David ruled from Hebron for 7.5 years. There's a 5.5-year difference between the length of Ishbosheth's reign and the time that David was king in Hebron. The sages explain this difference to mean that there was 5 years when there was no central leadership in Israel. They differ in whether those 5 years was immediately after Saul's death and before Ishbosheth gained the consensus of Israel to accept him as king, or whether those years followed Ishbosheth's rule at a time when support was gradually shifting to David. Look at 2 Samuel 3, verse 1. Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. But David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. The scripture relates the progress of this war between the house of David and the house of Saul. It began when supporters of Ishbosheth and David met at Gibeon to attempt to resolve the issue of who would be the king. Look at 2 Samuel 2, 12 and 13. Now Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met them by the pool of Gibeon, one on one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. Abner, Saul's cousin, represented the interests of Ishbosheth. Joab, the son of David's sister Zeruiah, represented David's interests. They decided to have a limited personal combat to settle the issue. 12 men from the tribe of Benjamin fought 12 men from the tribe of Judah. Every man succeeded in killing his opponent. All 24 men died in this battle at nearly the same time. Now, when this happened, a larger battle broke out between the two sides. 2 Samuel 2, 17 through 19. So there was a very fierce battle that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. Now the 3 sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab and Abishai and Asahel. And Asahel was as fleet of foot as a wild gazelle. So Asahel pursued Abner, and in going he did not turn to the right hand or to the left from following Abner. Abner and his men withdrew from the battle, but David's cousin Asahel doggedly pursued Abner and his men. When Asahel caught up with Abner, Abner tried to convince him to let him return safely to Ishbosheth's camp, but Asahel would not relent, so Abner was forced to kill him. 2 Samuel 2, 23. However, he refused to turn aside. Therefore Abner struck him in the stomach with the blunt end of the spear, so that the spear came out of his back, and he fell down there and died on the spot. So it was that as many as came to the place where Asahel fell down and died stood still. This event ended the battle. Joab's forces lost 20 men, including Asahel, while Abner's forces lost 360 men. Abner returned to Ishbosheth's camp at Mahanaim, and Joab returned to Hebron. This battle was apparently the beginning of the hostilities between Ishbosheth's and David's men. The scriptures don't describe any other battles between these two parties. It is possible that although there may have been many skirmishes between the two camps, the war was more of one of attrition, who would gain the loyalty and support of the rest of Israel. 1 Chronicles 12 describes how men from many tribes gradually joined David until he had a great army supporting him. 1 Chronicles 12, verse 22. For at that time they came to David day by day to help him, until it was a great army, like the army of God. Keel and Delish comment on this protracted conflict between Ishbosheth of the house of Saul and the house of David. The war does not mean continual fighting, but the state of hostilities or war in which they continued to stand toward one another. They concluded no peace, so that David was not recognized by Ishbosheth as king, any more than Ishbosheth by David. Now, not only is there nothing said about any continuance of actual warfare by Abner or Ishbosheth after the loss of the battle at Gibeon, but such a thing was very improbable in itself, as Ishbosheth was too weak to be able to carry on the war, whilst David waited with firm reliance upon the promise of the Lord until all Israel should come over to him. As David waited for Israel to come to him, Ishbosheth demonstrated that he would not be a strong king. His general Abner virtually ruled in his place. 2 Samuel 3, verse 6. Now it was so, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner was strengthening his hold on the house of Saul. Abner went so far as to apparently take one of Saul's concubines for his own. At least Ishbosheth accused him of doing so. 2 Samuel 3, verse 7. And Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, daughter of Ahai. So Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" This doesn't seem like such a big deal to us. After all, Saul was dead. But in that culture, this was a serious offense. The NKJV Study Bible explains the ramifications. The royal harem was the property of the king's successor. Taking a king's concubine was tantamount to claiming the throne. So Ishbosheth was basically claiming that Abner was trying to steal the throne, and accusing him of taking his father's concubine was a convenient way to make the accusation. In response, Abner swore to turn the kingdom over to David. 2 Samuel 3, 9 through 11. May God do also to Abner, and more also, if as the Lord had sworn to David, I do not accomplish this for him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul, and to establish the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan even to Beersheba. And he could no longer answer Abner a word, because he was afraid of him. Now Ishbosheth once more demonstrated that he was unqualified to be king, was too frightened of Abner to even respond to Abner's declaration. Abner opened negotiations with David that through Abner, Ishbosheth would turn the kingdom over to David. David's first request in the negotiations was that Ishbosheth restore his wife Michal to him. 2 Samuel 3, verse 14. So David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for 100 foreskins of the Philistines." David's demand for the return of Michal is essentially a demand for recognition that he never rebelled against Saul, that Michal was his lawful wife, and that he still had affection for her. Now remember, the last time that we saw that, or know that David saw Michal was in 1 Samuel 19, verse 12, when she helped him escape from Saul. Abner turned his persuasive powers to the task of convincing the leaders of Israel to put their support behind David. He admits that they all knew that David was God's anointed king. 2 Samuel 3, 17 through 18. Now Abner had communicated with the elders of Israel, saying, "In time past you were seeking for David to be king over you. Now then, do it. For the Lord has spoken of David, saying, By the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and the hand of all their enemies." Abner eventually took this same message to Hebron, where he was ready to turn Israel over to David. 2 Samuel 3, verse 21. Then Abner said to David, "I will arise and go and gather all Israel to my lord and king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires." So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. Now it seems that everything was working out peacefully. However, Joab held Abner personally accountable for killing his brother Asahel. Now, although David sent Abner away in peace, Joab plotted to kill him on the way. Joab secretly sent messengers to Abner, asking him to return to Hebron because David wanted to meet with him again. When Abner arrived, Joab killed him. Look at 2 Samuel 3, verse 27. Now when Abner had returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him privately, and there he stabbed him in the stomach. So he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. It seems that Joab is acting as the avenger, avenging the blood of his brother Asahel. In this case, Joab would be justified in killing Abner. In fact, Joab almost meets the conditions required for the avenger of blood. Joab lured Abner to the gates of Hebron. Hebron was a city of refuge, where a man who sought refuge would be tried for the murder. Now, if the man was found guilty, the avenger of blood could slay him without being subject himself to the avenger of blood for that man's death. However, Joab did not actually wait for a trial. He convicted Abner himself and stabbed Abner in the same place that Abner had struck Asahel. Now, the NKJV translation we read states that Joab struck Abner in the stomach. However, the literal Hebrew states that Joab struck him in the fifth, referring to the fifth rib. The Art Scroll commentary on Samuel proposes a possible courtroom scenario. The sages describe the dialogue at the court. Joab demanded, "Why did you kill Asahel?" "He was chasing me. It was self-defense." "Now, why didn't you injure him instead of killing him?" "I could not aim so exactly." "But you were able to strike him exactly in the fifth rib." Whereupon Joab struck Abner in the fifth rib, killing him, just as he had killed Asahel. Now when David learned that Joab had killed Abner, he declared that he had no knowledge of Joab's plan to kill Abner, and further stated that the guilt for Abner's death would be on the house of Joab. 2 Samuel 3, 29 through 30. Let it rest on the head of Joab and all his father's house, and let there never fail to be in the house of Joab one who has a discharge or is a leper, who leans on a staff or falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. Now, so Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel at Gibeon in the battle. Abner's death upset all the plans for the peaceful turning over of the kingdom of Ishbosheth to David. Would Ishbosheth still turn the kingdom over to David? Would the rest of Israel support David without Abner's support? From Ishbosheth's point of view, would David still allow him to live? 17th century theologian Matthew Poole concludes that it was actually better for both Joab and David that Abner was dead. Joab killed Abner to revenge the death of Asahel, and withal, though it not be here mentioned, to secure his own standing, and rid his hands of so great and powerful a competitor. And thus was Joab's design. But God had other designs in it, both to punish Abner's manifest wickedness, and particularly his rebellion against David and against God and his own conscience therein, and that David might not owe his kingdom to Abner and to his revenge and treachery, but wholly to God's wise and powerful providence. Now, after Abner's death, two of Ishbosheth's captains decided to take events into their own hands. They killed Ishbosheth while he was resting. They brought his head to David, thinking that David would reward them for their actions. They must have forgotten that David had the opportunity twice to kill Saul while he was resting, but David would not harm God's anointed. They must have forgotten that David killed the Amalekite who brought the news that he had killed Saul. David responded consistently with his previous actions toward Saul. 2 Samuel 4:10-11. When someone told me, saying, "Look, Saul is dead," thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag, the one who thought I would give him a reward for his news. Now how much more when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house on his bed? Therefore, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth? David had the two captains put to death, just like he had the Amalekite who admitted to killing Saul put to death. David mourned and honored Ishbosheth, just like he had mourned Saul and Jonathan. David did not take the kingdom of Israel by force of arms. He refused to allow Israel to engage in outright civil war. Instead, he waited patiently for God to bring the kingdom to him. As Ishbosheth's weakness was revealed, more and more men of Israel turned to David. Slowly but surely, David won the hearts and loyalty of all 12 tribes of Israel. David would fulfill the mandate of delivering Israel from the Philistines and set up an eternal kingly lineage. I'm Dan Cathcart from Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.